Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining me. Guys, I'm going to tell you why this war in Eastern Europe is absolutely inevitable. There's a lot of mainstream media and a lot of stuff out in the media, and people have all got these, their own perspective on it. They're all wrong unless they're saying what I'm saying. Now, I'm going to give you my biases for this video. My biases are: I believe that we should have laws. I believe that the same international laws should fractionate down into domestic laws. For example, I'm not allowed to go and take my neighbour's garden because they provoked me by having a couple of beers. Equally, another country shouldn't be able to go and take a part of another country because they're claiming that there's some sort of provocation or something there. And my thoughts on this provocation argument with regards to Ukraine. It's just ridiculous. So first of all, guys, before we get into this video, we need to understand the background, because I've seen it so many times and it's really winding me up watching it on the TV. People are starting this story about Ukraine from 2022. You can keep going back in history and there's always developments on this, on this sphere. You can go back to the Second World War. You can go back to after the Second World War when, Churchill wanted to invade. You can go to the Cold War. You can go to the fall of the Soviet Union. Or, at some point you've got to say, right, this is where we have this Overton window, I guess. So I'm going to start this story, guys, from, I'd like to start my story, my narration from 2013. So the Maidan Revolution, which is why all this, current conflict, it's why it all started. So what was the Maidan Revolution? Why did it start? Well, it started basically, guys, I'm really simplifying this, all right? I understand all the intricacies and the, and the wider spectrum. In essence, the Maidan Revolution started because young people in Ukraine wanted a better life for themselves. It's that simple. That's, there's no other way around it. So there was an election. Yanukovych won the election, but the exit polls that the young people were manning. So in Ukraine, when you leave a polling, same as many other parts of the world, when you leave a polling station, you tell people who you voted for. And there was such a discrepancy between the exit polls and the win. So when people say Yanukovych was a democratically elected leader, I don't see that, guys. I would be quite confident that the election was rigged. And don't forget, these young people, they're looking now, they're 16, 17, 18, 19. They're looking to places like Poland, Czechoslovakia. They get paid over double, sometimes 3 times more for doing the same job. They've got a better quality of life. They've got a lot more opportunities. And you know what, guys? They just wanted a better life for themselves, guys, all right? So this is what started the initial protest around the Euromaidan, the Maidan Revolution. Now, did the US intelligence service or whoever fan the flame? I don't know. But I'd say it's likely. They certainly could have fanned that flame. But guys, let's be under no illusion. If somebody, in our elections in the UK, when there's protests in America, our adversaries fan that flame also, so it's likely that they did. I don't know if it's I've got no first-hand experience of this, but it is likely that happened. Now, there was lots of things that was happening in and around that time, but to keep this video quite short and to move on quickly, what I want to do is I want to leave it when Vladimir Putin then sent in troops to annex Crimea. So if you all remember that, there was these little green men turned up from Russia in Russian trucks with Russian weapons, Russian uniforms, speaking Russian. But Vladimir Putin said, "No, I have no regular troops in Crimea." Yeah, of course, they were special forces. Guys, and this is when I started to think, Putin has got the West wrapped around his finger, because people are stupid. We've got our class of politicians, certainly in the UK, they're a bit thick. I'm just going to put it out there. They fall for honey traps. they don't do as good. Guys, there's just lots of stuff about it, all right? But this is when I looked and I thought, right, Putin really has got the West singing out of his, out of his playbook. Obviously, now people have wised up to it. So let's keep that in mind. Annexation of Crimea. There's fighting now in the east in the Donbass regions around Donetsk. What you've got to understand now is diplomatic relations in that time. And there's all these, all these people, all these pundits like coming up saying, the CIA had secret bases in Ukraine. All right, guys, all right, listen. There is no secret bases in Ukraine without the Ukrainians asking for it. That's kind of like an act of war. It just doesn't happen. So when people are saying, oh, there was all these secret bases in Ukraine, what do we mean? What's a secret CIA base? Right now, what is your image of a secret CIA base? Is it, like some sort of Black Hawk Down thing with guys walking around in, Americans walking around in mirrored aviators? Is that CIA base? Well, I doubt it. What I think they may be referring to there is potential funding for training and reinforcement kind of stuff. And again, these things are always asked for by the host nation. So if you work in an embassy, it's your job to assist whatever country you're in. It's your job to assist with their requests. Now, I can pretty much guarantee you none of these celebrity pundits or commentators or whoever have ever worked in an embassy. They don't know what it's like. They don't understand the culture. They don't understand the stresses that you're under. So the embassy staff are there to help. So if somebody asks them, for example, and I'm just totally making this up, if the president of Ukraine at that time went to the US embassy and asked, can you provide training assistance to our military? And I don't know if that happened. I'm assuming it would have done because it would kind of make sense, But if you're asked as an embassy, then that's your job to do that. You're not putting a CIA base on that country. You're doing it on request of a country. So, none of even if there were secret CIA bases, none of them were there without Ukraine's permission. So that brings us back onto the word provocation. So what we're saying is, for all those people who say that, Russia was provoked, are we saying that Ukraine isn't allowed to ask other countries for assistance? It's just ludicrous, absolutely ludicrous. And remember what I said at the beginning of this video. If the law doesn't, disseminate down to a domestic level, then it shouldn't be a law. So if we're having a case where, Vladimir Putin's allowed to invade a country because he's a nuclear power and he's bigger and he's more powerful, why can't I go and take my neighbour's garden because, our family are bigger and more powerful? Why can't we do that? Why can't we just have a stage where, okay, right, let's say that let's just have this as the normal then. Let's just invade each other and, might is right. So that's what we can't do, guys. Let me just read you what we actually mean by provocation and provoke, because everybody's using this word, but it's one of those words where it can have totally contradicting meanings. So provoke, stimulate, give rise to a reaction or emotion, typically a strong or unwelcome one in someone. So in what context then are we provoking? In what context and by whose definition are we being provoked? So did the Ukrainians provoke the Russians by wanting to defend themselves? So listen to this statement. The Ukrainians provoked the Russians by defending themselves and not wanting the Russians to attack. It's just absurd, guys. And every time I see these 10 bob pundits on TV thinking they're clever because they've read something on the interweb, all right, about, provocation and secret CIA bases, I can pretty much guarantee there were no Americans running around in CIA bases. I can pretty much guarantee that. Was there funding put in? Well, from my experience in Iraq and Afghanistan, there may have been, but I've certainly got no first-hand experience of that. So that's kind of the context from 2013 to 2022. So 2022 invasion comes. Now, this is where a lot of people just start and say, oh, the invasion was provoked by the West. So we've already discussed how there was no such thing as provocation. There was Russian aggression and nothing else. And the Russian aggression was because the young people wanted a better life for themselves. So if we go right back to 2013, the Ukrainians provoked Russia to attack by wanting a better life for themselves. You see what I mean? Imagine if you left your partner and because you wanted a better life for yourself, and then they came and stole your house and the police came and said, yeah, well, you did want a better life for yourself, you provoked them. Guys, it just doesn't wash. It's ridiculous, it's ludicrous. I don't, and it winds me up every time I see people on the TV talking about this. So, and it's not their fault as well, they just don't know. You can't punish a dog for doing something wrong if the dog doesn't know they're doing something wrong. Which is why a lot of mainstream media and a lot of people in the media, on the TV, politicians, they just don't know. It's not their fault, they just don't know. So, 2022 invasion comes, after the invasion, the Russian elites were very, very anti-invasion. And why do I mention the elites? Because in Russia, it's the elites and the people, well, I guess it is everywhere, but it is a lot more so in Russia. You get a lot of oligarchs who control things. The people with money, the people with influence, the people with power, they control things, they put influence on people, and that's kind of how it works in Russia. It's not a good place to live if you're born not into an oligarch. If you're born into an oligarch family, it's absolutely brilliant. But initially in this war, the elites, the people with money, they were very anti-war. They were losing money. They were watching on the TV and on the news. Russia were taking huge, and they were, Russia were taking huge losses. They were using. I remember watching this invasion and just rubbing my head and thinking, wow, I can't believe what I'm seeing. Some of the tactics the Russians were using were like, World War II tactics at best, if they were using tactics at all. But then you've got to understand how the Russian war machine works. You've got to understand the Russian ethos and the mentality. So there's the sanctions started getting placed on oligarchs and sanctioning people's money, freezing people's money, and a lot of these the people with money started to return home. They started to live in Russia, and then the sentiment in Russia started to change, and it's kind of changed at the moment from a sense of condemning the war initially to accepting the war. And now what a lot of people are talking about in Russia, the elites, they're talking about the exit strategy, how it's going to end. Remember, when NATO, the coalition, went into Iraq and Afghanistan, there wasn't a clear exit strategy, certainly not for Iraq. The exit strategy in Afghanistan, it was to take down Al-Qaeda. In Iraq, it was very unclear. And this is how things, when you don't have a clear exit strategy, building your mission templates and building your concept of operations up to that exit strategy kind of don't work because they're meaningless. You're just doing war for war's sake. You get mission creep and then mission creep on the mission creep, and then all sorts of bad stuff happens. You don't know what you're doing, you're committed, and you have absolute disasters. So the Russian elite are now talking about what is the exit strategy. Now there's three main schools of thought. One would be, and there's three main schools of thought and then every shade in between. So the first one would be, a small win, a small battlefield win that Putin could put his hand up and he could say, yes, of course, we won this war in Ukraine. We will stop the war now. We have done what we wanted to do. So this could be either, taking Kharkiv, as I've been saying for a long time, Kharkiv is the next target, or it could be potentially pushing up to the River Dnipro and taking half of Kiev. I know those two things there's a big difference between those two, but I'm putting those two in the category of a small win. Why? I feel they would be equally equally as costly. I know Kharkiv is very close to the border. It's it's very close to the fighting, whereas Kiev is a long way away. But for people who are not ex-military, who don't understand how these things work, taking a city of the size of Kharkiv, it's almost impossible. You're fighting a three-dimensional battlefield. You're looking up, you're looking down, and as in under the ground. You're looking all around. There's cover. There's so all your technological advances, as in your night vision, your scopes, your tanks, they become irrelevant in a built-up area, and you are literally fighting the whole city. So it would take a huge amount of manpower to take Kharkiv. Then you've got up to the River Dnipro, so that would just be a huge land grab up to the River Dnipro, half of Kiev. You isolate Kharkiv, and then that could be equally as costly. So that's a small win. The mid option would be Kiev itself. Putin, he understands history, and you can say what you want about Putin, but it's my belief that the reason Kiev's not come under heavy bombardment like Baghdad did, for example, in 2003, is because Putin understands that Kiev is the birthplace of Russia. Kiev is the spiritual home of the Russians. So he understands this, and he's been to Kiev quite a lot. I've no doubt he loves it. It's a brilliant city. So that would be the next play. And then the third, and the most terrifying would be Putin just wants to attack a NATO country. And I'll come back onto these, options later. But right now, the country of Ukraine, they're really struggling. There's delays in Western aid. The training of their pilots, their ground crew, their maintenance crew. It's not going well. There's a lack of manpower. There's a lack of comparable manufacturing capacity, in the sense that look at the size of Russia, look at the size of Ukraine. It goes without saying that Ukraine doesn't have the manufacturing capacity that Russia does. And it also goes without saying that NATO in itself doesn't have the manufacturing capacity that Russia does. Why? Simple answer, red tape. Us in NATO, NATO countries, we like health and safety, we like working hours, we like, having all the latest equipment, and that slows things down. In Russia, they do things quick, fast and dirty. So that's why we just don't have the, we don't have the capacity, we don't have the manufacturing capability. So Russia's elite now are looking at this, and they're seeing weakness in the West, and they're actually thinking, well, you know what? We could actually win this as Russia grinds on and makes small battlefield advances. The war economy is in a better condition now than it was. The Russian economy in general is in a better position as it was now. So the elites are now thinking, well, I'm an oligarch, I'm running the shots. If Russia does win this war, it's going to line my pockets. And they're seeing the weakness in the West. They're seeing a potential collapse in the West, as we are with Russia. But also, they're also seeing the peril that if Russia does not win this conflict, if Russia does not have this win that they want, then this will be the collapse of Russia. There'll be a balkanization of Russia, where you will just have, individual states broken up, and they'll all be smaller countries, and that will be it. And it will be the end to Vladimir Putin's. It will be the end to Vladimir Putin's Russia. So they're the two. They're the two kind of positions there. You've got both sides now, both looking East versus West. You've got both sides looking at total collapse and total failure, and I'll come on to that. And I'll come on to why in a minute. So let's skip back, guys, quickly to the the three options. So a small win, Kharkiv, or up to the Dnipro. We've spoke about that. We kind of understand what that would take. An attack on Kiev. An attack on Kiev would be the biggest city assault, I think, ever. I don't think anyone's ever tried taking a city as big as Kiev. normally what you do is you would surround it, you would turn the utilities off, then you would you would isolate smaller regions, you would take those smaller regions and take it piecemeal. He could also just circumvent all these, or he could do all of these options. Now the terrifying one, and this is why you've got all your Baltic states and Poland really ratcheting up their defences, is because Putin right now, he could think, right, okay, I'm not happy with just a win in Ukraine. I want to take a NATO country. And why this would be so important? Because if Putin attacks a NATO country and there's no response, it's the end to NATO, it's the end to the West. There's going to have to be something else. And Russia will prevail, because more people will flock to the BRICS nations, because NATO is kind of backed by the US dollar. And if people are trading in the US dollar and they think, why am I trading in the US dollar? All I get is sanctioned. They can't help me militarily if something goes wrong. I'm just going to go with the BRICS, which you would. And as more emerging nations move forwards to the BRICS, Vladimir Putin gets, he gets empowered. So if we think about the Baltic states, then we'll go from the top. We'll go Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland. Now, all these regions, there's lots of little border towns in these regions. That small border towns, highly, I don't want to use the word ethnically Russian, I guess. They speak Russian, they share Russian culture. There's a lot of these towns on that border. It's a big border. Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland. My personal, what I think is the most likely option would be, Putin could do a land grab from Belarus across the Suwalki corridor into Kaliningrad. That would open up, sea routes for him. It would be a good commercial route, and it would be it's a relatively small land grab, like 60 kilometers. Now, if this happens, is NATO going to go to war? A potential third world war over a 60 kilometer corridor? That is the question. What else he could do? He could find one of these border towns. He could pump some money into it, get the people to start saying that they're ethnically Russian. They're being persecuted by by the Finns, by the Estonians, by the Latvians, by the Lithuanians. Any of these guys, all right? Once this comes out and people, and it's out there and people are saying, oh, we've been persecuted by because we're a minority. Please, Russia, help us. Please, Russia, help us. Then Putin could move in and just, annex a small piece of land. And if we look at this, guys, is NATO really going to go to World War III over a small piece of land? I don't know. But if they don't, it's the end of NATO, it's the end of the dollar, it's the end of the West. And that's what's at stake at the moment. But we need to, and a little bit more about Vladimir Putin, because we need to understand history because we can't. My nan died recently, and as a family, we don't want to give up her house. There's a problem with the bank, there's money owed on it. It makes no financial sense for us to fight for that house. It makes no sense at all, but we're doing it. Why? I don't know. It's something deeper than logic or money or cost. It's part of you. It's part of who you are. You don't want to let these things go. This is a house I grew up in. I remember the squeak on the steps as I walked down into the little extension. I'm not going to give that up without a fight. So you need to understand history. You need to understand the background to these things before we can understand, how we're going to move forward. Because our political class in the UK, they only see things with a 4-year, they only see themselves with a 4-year shelf life. Because after 4 years, they could be gone. So they try and don't rattle any sabres for 4 years, get paid and maybe get elected again at the next time. Vladimir Putin's first prime minister was Tony Blair. That's how long he's been in power. So he's seen all these little fanboys come and go, and his goal, his vision, it's been the same. So Putin was Vladimir Putin was at a very, very impressionable age in 1962, at the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis. He was 10, and he was witnessing all this as a young boy. And nobody talks about this, guys. Nobody understands the history. Nobody understands the background of these people. All right, watch your celebrity commentators. Imagine, right, your celebrity commentator. What have they done with their life? They've been on TV since they were in their early 20s. They've gone to parties, and now they're up here telling us telling us how the world works. They don't know. So Vladimir Putin, he was a very impressionable age when the Cuban Missile Crisis was happening in 1962. Like I said, he was 10. So he witnessed all this, and he witnessed the fall of the Soviet Union. And this has molded him as a man, because when you're at that impressionable age, anything that happens afterwards doesn't matter. You've already been, what's the word I'm looking for? You've already got your opinions, and they're not going to change for anyone. So this is why he may risk attacking a small NATO enclave. Now, would NATO go to war for a small piece of land? Would they go full force World War III for 60 kilometres, I think it might be 60 miles, of the Suwalki corridor? Would NATO go full World War III for a small, Estonian border town that all speak Russian, that want to be Russian, that have just voted to be Russian? Would NATO risk World War III for that? Would the public in those countries want their countries to go to war for something like this? So this is what we're talking about now, guys. If they don't go to war, then it's the end. Then it is the end to NATO. Because if they're not going to back up what they say, what's the point? If you're not, it's like, if you threaten your child with, a grounding or taking away their computer or whatever. If you threaten them and they continue to misbehave, you have to do it, because otherwise they won't believe you the next time, and then things will just get worse, and then it'll be used on the back foot. So this is where we are at the moment, guys, and this is why we are on such an absolute knife edge. If NATO doesn't defend a small piece of land or a Suwalki corridor, it's the end to NATO, it's the end to the West, and it's the end to I feel it would be the end to our laws, because how can you sit in the NATO country and say, oh, well, yeah, we've got these laws, but they only apply to everybody else. If you're Vladimir Putin, the laws don't apply to you because you're really big and powerful. And remember what I said at the beginning, guys, with my garden analogy. If that's the case, then we can all go and take our neighbour's garden if we think we can have him in a fight. You know what I'm saying? That's the kind of reality that we're in. If NATO doesn't respect their own laws that they've imposed upon themselves, then it's the end. Also, on the Russian side of it, if the Russians fail, then the Russians know that there's going to be balkanization. It's going to be the end to the way that Russia is at the moment. So both sides now are backed into corners that they can't come out of. They can't get out of. You've got Donald Trump saying that he will end the war. Well, how is he going to end that war? The only way I can see Donald Trump ending this war is saying no more weapons, you guys peace talks. Okay, that's fine. What war are we talking about? Are we talking about the conventional war? Because if the conventional war ends, there'll be an asymmetric, unconventional guerrilla war, and this will be at least 20 years. There's that many weapons and small arms and explosives out there at the moment. That asymmetric war, that non-conventional war, that would go on for another 20 years. So will Trump pull funding? I think that's his only, as I see it, that's the only thing he can do. I mean, what else can he do, really, Trump? Now, Europe, they're not going to pull funding. You've got Finland, Estonia, Latvia, you've got the Baltic, Lithuania, Poland. They are 100% not going to pull the funding, because they know if they pull the funding, they could be next. you've got the rest of Europe, you've got the UK. So the funding won't leave Ukraine if Trump pulls the funding. And remember what I've said for quite a while, you're going to see this diversions, but I'm not going to go, I'm not going to go on to that. So guys, that is where we are in the world at the moment. That's why, this conflict, I don't see any way out for any side. I don't see any way that people can back out of it. Because if either side backs out of it, even for a little bit, it means they've lost. If Russia backs out and, says, oh, we want peace talks, we're going back, it's the end to Russia. It's the end. They're going to be balkanized. If NATO backs out, if NATO stops funding, and then a small part of a NATO country is attacked, then it's the end to NATO, it's the end to the dollar, and it's the end to the status quo as we know it at the moment. Remember, guys, all right? We are living in Thucydides' trap where violence is the norm. It's gonna, that's looking back through history, guys. These things always end in violence. So that's where we are at the moment, guys. All right. We've got commentators in the UK who are looking at things through Western eyes, guys. Half of these people have never left the country. Half of them have never. Well, I can pretty much guarantee none of them have ever worked in an embassy. None of them know what it's like to have those diplomatic relations with other people. And to make things move forward. So guys, that is the reality of the situation. So when you hear people saying on the news saying, oh yes, but they were provoked. Okay, when were Russia provoked? 2013? How? 2014, 2015, 2016? Well, you've already invaded. You can't... So, and like some people say, oh yeah, but they were provoking. They were in 2014, in 2014, US secret CIA bases were in Ukraine and they were provoking a Russian attack. Hang on a minute. So Russia had already annexed Crimea and sent their troops into Donbass around Donetsk. There was already fighting, and that's when the Ukrainians started provoking them. It doesn't make sense, guys. And any of these provocation arguments, they don't stand up to any scrutiny from anybody with half a brain cell on this topic. I'd love to scrutinise some of these people who say, Ukraine was, Russia was provoked. But guys, that's it. Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you've got to the end already and you're watching at 32 minutes and 23 seconds, guys, and you've not done so already, give me a like and a subscribe. Really appreciate it. I'll see you later. I'm going to mag to grid.